Okay, the second little discussion is going to refer you back to the O'Brien story, The Things They Carried, that you wrote on quite some time ago. And what I wanted to point out to you is that assignment was designed to get you looking at the structure of the story, and the elements and the pieces of writing fiction, the techniques or the craftsmanship of how the story was written. And I think that's a particularly good example, and I'm going to attach to this discussion, or I'll email it to you separately if I can't attach it. One of your colleagues did, I think, a very fine job in focusing on how the thing works. So I got essays all the way from some folks who just simply told the story over again, and nothing but plot summary, which is, I will be honest with you, those are useless in an analytical paper, because telling me the story that I've already read doesn't do anything for you or me. And then some folks took a stab at analyzing the story. That's why I chose question 6 to focus the story. Because it kind of makes you look at the structure of the thing. So there are a couple of suggestions, and I'll let you read and comment. Don't comment on your colleague's paper, because that's not really what this discussion is about. But your colleague noticed, I think quite cogently, that these repeated retellings of Lavender's death are cumulative. Each one adds something to the next one and becomes more vivid and more specific. And your colleague quite rightly notes that that's a technique. And what it may reflect or mirror, at least it's a reasonable thesis to defend, is that this constant sort of growing of the story of Lavender's death reflects the shift of responsibility onto Lieutenant Cross. That as the responsibility shifts, it's mirrored in the story by having these details become larger and larger, and in a sense heavier and heavier. Think about the story, The Things They Carried. And so as it shifts to Cross, that's mirrored in the story. And I think it's probably a good argument that the name Cross and what that word means in Western iconography, probably that's a deliberate choice. The characters probably deliberately named Cross for a reason, to help us see this loading up of these various responsibilities onto this person. I think that's probably deliberate. So the thing to remember is, with fiction, absolutely nothing happens by accident. Everything is by design. So, and a fictional piece may or may not reflect reality. This story may never have happened in real life. That doesn't matter. The writer has written a story, and he's put certain elements into it, and he's used certain tools and certain craftsmanship to design the story in a way that means something larger than what the words say. That's how fiction works. And so all that a good analyst of fiction will do is come along behind and notice that and say, oh, look at this. Look at how this works. Isn't that great? Those two things in that story, the repeated and cumulative retellings of Lavender's death, and that's what question 6 asks you to talk about. And then the fact, as your colleague probably noticed quite powerfully, they're cumulative, and they reflect O'Brien's decision to write this story in a way so that, in a sense, the burden, the thing they carried, is gradually shifted to Cross. Cross is clearly the protagonist of the story, and some of you mentioned that, and that's great. But you don't even have to say that word to just talk about how it happened. So what I'd like you to do is to read your colleague's paper. It was among the best ones I got. I don't want you to talk about that paper, but notice how your colleague analyzes the story, looking at the craftsmanship of it, and then at how he avoids plot summary, because that's a total waste of time. And then I'd like you to talk about some of the stories that you are analyzing and some of the techniques that you have noticed and that you've used to organize your essay in the same way that this colleague of yours organized that one. So talk about some of your stories. Basically boil your essay down, the one that you're just uploading, the one that you've just uploaded, boil it down into a paragraph and just talk to your colleagues about what you've done, what you noticed, and how the story works. Remember, a short story is a piece that's created by the writer. Doesn't necessarily reflect reality, doesn't necessarily be anything that has happened. It's a piece of craftsmanship. It's a created thing that's created in exactly the same way as you build a doghouse or you make a sculpture. You write a story the same way. You assemble the pieces, you bring your craftsmanship to bear on it, and you shape the thing into a beautiful piece of art. Then we as literary critics, we come along and we simply notice that and talk about it and say, wow, look at how this writer does this, and what does this reflect? So again, the shifting of the burden onto cross, whether it happened or not is entirely irrelevant. The shifting of the burden in the story reflects the shifting responsibility onto cross, and the name is chosen deliberately. An analyst, a scholar of literature can notice that. So talk about your stories, read your colleague's story, and see how that person accomplished a pretty good analysis. And then talk about one of your own stories and use the kinds of techniques that your colleague has used to talk about it. So what did you notice? What elements did you notice? And how did those elements fit together to achieve a total effect? That's what we're after. Okay, so this is discussion number 2. There's one more, and then one little tiny assignment, and that's it for the week. Thanks, bye.